The Alpha Company was lost in the blinding snowstorm of the Hindu Kush, their GPS and radios dead. Captain Rodriguez had led them astray for 6 hours, and the soldiers were freezing and exhausted. When he finally admitted defeat, Lieutenant Sarah Kim stepped forward, armed with only her grandfather's compass and sharp instincts. November 2019 in the Hindu Kush was unforgiving. Temperatures plummeted to 15 degrees and snow piled up to 60 centimeters. A fierce blizzard reduced visibility to just 10 meters, turning the rugged mountain terrain into a white maze. The biting wind howled through the peaks, and the cold seeped into every layer of clothing, threatening frostbite and hypothermia. The Hindu Kush mountains of Afghanistan had claimed countless lives over the centuries, and this storm was proving to be one of the most dangerous weather events the region had seen in years. Alpha Company 47 Strong had been on a routine patrol when their GPS and radio systems failed, jammed by intense electromagnetic interference. Captain Rodriguez, their seasoned leader, took charge, but unknowingly led them off course. For 6 grueling hours, the unit trudged through the snow, following what they thought was the right path. The soldiers' morale was sinking as exhaustion and cold took their toll. Fingers and toes went numb, breaths came in ragged gasps, and the threat of losing men to the elements loomed large. Equipment became heavier with each step, and the familiar landmarks that should have guided them home were completely obscured by the relentless snowfall. When Rodriguez finally admitted they were lost, a heavy silence fell over the group. The admission sent ripples of fear through the ranks. Being lost in these conditions was often a death sentence. The temperature was dropping rapidly as night approached, and without shelter or a clear direction, home hypothermia would claim lives within hours. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, a 28-year-old intelligence officer of Korean-American descent, had never been in direct combat. Her sharp eyes, standing at 160 meters, always carried the weight of her grandfather's old compass, a relic from the Korean War. Despite her impeccable West Point education in military geography, many in the unit doubted her ability to lead them out of the storm. Sergeant Murphy, a 35-year-old Iraq veteran, voiced the common sentiment, "She only knows how to read paper maps, never been in the field." As the wind howled around them and visibility dropped to near zero, Captain Rodriguez gathered his senior NCOs for an emergency conference. The reality was stark. They were lost in one of the world's most dangerous mountain ranges during a blizzard with no electronic navigation aids and dwindling time before hypothermia began claiming lives. "We need options," Rodriguez said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Anyone have ideas?" It was then that Lieutenant Sarah Kim stepped forward, pulling her grandfather's compass from her jacket pocket. The brass instrument, worn smooth by decades of use, caught what little light filtered through the storm. "Sir, I can get us home," she said with quiet confidence that surprised even herself. Sergeant Murphy's reaction was immediate and harsh. "With all due respect, Lieutenant, this isn't a classroom exercise. We're talking about 47 lives here, not some West Point navigation course." Other soldiers murmured their agreement. Sarah had earned their respect as an intelligence officer, but leading men through a life-or-death situation in hostile terrain was entirely different from analyzing maps in a heated command post. Despite the skepticism, Captain Rodriguez was out of options. "Lieutenant Kim, what's your assessment?" Sarah studied her grandfather's compass, then looked up at the barely visible sky, searching for any celestial reference points. Her West Point training in military geography had included extensive study of traditional navigation methods, skills that seemed antiquated in an age of GPS, but were proving invaluable now. Sir, based on the compass bearing and what I can determine from the North Star's position, we're approximately 8 kilometers south of our intended route, she reported. The wind patterns and the slope of the terrain confirm this assessment. She knelt in the snow, sketching a rough map with her gloved finger. If we head northwest following the natural contours of this ridge, we should intersect with the main valley that leads back to base. Sergeant Murphy shook his head. You're gambling with our lives based on a compass and some stars you can barely see. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Sergeant, this compass guided my grandfather through the Korean War. It's never let our family down, and it won't start today. With no other viable options, Captain Rodriguez made the decision that would either save or doom them all. Lieutenant Kim, you have the lead. Get us home. The responsibility was overwhelming, but Sarah drew strength from the weight of her grandfather's compass and the knowledge he had passed down to her. In near-zero visibility, she began guiding the unit using techniques that predated modern technology by centuries. She read the landscape like a book written in snow and stone. The lean of the trees, shaped by prevailing winds, told her about direction. The crunch of snow underfoot revealed the underlying terrain. The subtle changes in slope indicated their position relative to the main valley system. We move in single file, Sarah instructed, her voice carrying new authority. I'll break trail. Everyone stays within arm's reach of the person in front of them. If anyone loses contact, we stop immediately. The march began with Sarah leading 46 soldiers into the white void, armed with nothing but an antique compass. Her training and an unshakable belief that knowledge and determination could overcome even the most hostile environment. The initial phase of Sarah's navigation proved to be the most challenging test of her theoretical knowledge. In the classroom at West Point Terrain Association had been an academic exercise involving topographic maps and controlled conditions. Here, with visibility reduced to mere meters and familiar landmarks obliterated by snow, every decision carried life or death consequences. Sarah moved with deliberate caution, stopping frequently to check her compass bearing and assess the terrain. She used her understanding of mountain geography to identify subtle clues that others missed, the way snow accumulated differently on north-facing versus south-facing slopes, the patterns of wind erosion that indicated prevailing weather directions. "Why are we stopping so much?" complained Private Johnson, his voice muffled by the face mask that was already crusted with ice. "Because getting there alive is more important than getting there fast," Sarah replied, adjusting their course slightly based on a change in the wind direction that suggested they were approaching a valley system. Sergeant Murphy remained skeptical, but began to notice the systematic nature of Sarah's navigation. She wasn't guessing, she was reading the environment like a complex text that only she could understand. As the hours passed and Sarah's navigation proved consistently accurate, the soldiers' attitudes began to shift. Her calm confidence in the face of seemingly impossible conditions was infectious, and even the most skeptical began to believe that she might actually get them home. "How do you know we're going the right way?" asked Corporal Martinez during one of their brief rest stops. Sarah pointed to a barely visible rock formation emerging from the snow. "That outcropping has a specific shape that indicates we're in the upper reaches of the Khyber drainage system. The compass bearing confirms we're heading toward the main valley. Her explanations were technical, but reassuring, demonstrating that her navigation was based on solid principles rather than hope or luck. The soldiers began to understand that their lives were in the hands of someone who truly understood the science of finding one's way in the wilderness. Sergeant Murphy, who had been the most vocal critic, found himself impressed despite his reservations. "I've been in these mountains for 6 months," he admitted to his squad leader, "and I never noticed half the things she's pointing out." 8 hours into their march, Sarah faced the most difficult decision of the navigation. The terrain ahead split into 2 possible routes, a shorter but steeper path that would save time but increase the risk of avalanche, or a longer route that followed safer ground but would extend their exposure to the elements. With hypothermia beginning to affect some of the soldiers, time was becoming a critical factor. But Sarah's training had taught her that in survival situations, the safe choice was usually the right choice, even if it seemed counterintuitive. "We're taking the longer route," she announced, pointing toward what appeared to be a more circuitous path through the valley. Lieutenant Captain Rodriguez said privately, "Some of the men are showing signs of severe cold exposure. Are you sure we can afford the extra time?" Sarah's response demonstrated the kind of leadership that couldn't be taught in a classroom. "Sir, if we lose anyone to an avalanche on the shorter route, we lose them permanently. If we take the longer route, we might be cold and tired, but we'll all make it home." As dawn approached after 14 hours of continuous movement through the blizzard, Sarah's navigation was vindicated when the familiar silhouette of their base camp emerged through the swirling snow. The soldiers, exhausted but intact, let out a collective cheer that echoed across the valley. Not a single soldier had been lost or seriously injured during the ordeal. Sarah's systematic approach to navigation, combined with her understanding of mountain weather and terrain, had brought them through one of the most dangerous situations any of them had ever faced. Sergeant Murphy was among the first to approach Sarah as they reached safety. "Lieutenant," he said, extending his hand, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you, dead wrong." The handshake that followed represented more than just personal reconciliation. It marked Sarah's acceptance into the brotherhood of soldiers who had proven themselves under fire. She had earned their respect not through combat heroics, but through the quiet competence and unshakable determination that defined true leadership. Captain Rodriguez's recommendation for her promotion to Battalion Operations Officer was immediate and enthusiastic, recognizing that Sarah had demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical thinking and calm leadership that modern military operations required. Just when it seemed they were making steady progress toward safety, the storm intensified with a ferocity that caught even Sarah off guard. Wind speeds increased to near hurricane levels, driving snow horizontally across the mountainside and reducing visibility to less than 5 meters. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees, pushing the wind chill into the range where exposed skin would freeze within minutes. Several soldiers began showing advanced signs of hypothermia, confusion, slurred speech, and the dangerous drowsiness that preceded unconsciousness. Private Chen stumbled and fell repeatedly, his coordination compromised by the cold. Corporal Williams started removing his gloves despite the freezing temperature, a classic sign of severe hypothermia that could prove fatal. "Lieutenant," Sergeant Murphy called out over the howling wind, "We've got 3 men who need immediate shelter or we're going to lose them." Sarah faced an impossible choice. They were still 2 hours from base camp under normal conditions. But in this weather, it could take 4 hours or more. The soldiers showing hypothermia symptoms might not survive that long, but stopping to build emergency shelter in these conditions would be nearly impossible and could endanger the entire unit. Her grandfather's compass seemed heavier in her hand as she realized that all her navigation skills meant nothing if she couldn't keep her soldiers alive long enough to reach safety. This was the moment that would define Sarah's military career, not her ability to read terrain or use a compass, but her capacity to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. Every principle of military leadership she had learned at West Point was being tested simultaneously. "We're going to buddy up," Sarah announced, her voice cutting through the wind with newfound authority. Each healthy soldier takes responsibility for someone showing cold symptoms. Share body heat, share equipment, and nobody gets left behind. She organized the unit into pairs, ensuring that the strongest soldiers were matched with those most affected by the cold. It was a calculated risk, slowing down. The healthy soldiers might endanger everyone, but abandoning the hypothermic soldiers was not an option she would consider. "Sergeant Murphy," she called out, "I need you to take point with me. Your experience in these mountains combined with my navigation will get us home faster than either of us could manage alone." The partnership between the skeptical veteran and the untested lieutenant represented a new dynamic in military leadership, the combination of practical experience with theoretical knowledge, creating a synergy that was greater than the sum of its parts. As they resumed their march into the teeth of the storm, Sarah realized that true leadership wasn't about being right all the time. It was about making the best decisions possible with incomplete information and accepting responsibility for the consequences. With less than an hour remaining to base camp, Sarah faced her ultimate test as a leader. The soldier showing the most severe hypothermia symptoms, Private Chen collapsed in the snow and couldn't be roused to consciousness. Carrying him would slow the entire unit significantly, but leaving him behind was unthinkable. "I'll carry him," volunteered Sergeant Murphy, but Sarah could see that the veteran was also showing signs of exhaustion and cold exposure. "No," Sarah said firmly. "We'll take turns. 15-minute rotations. Everyone who's able participates." It was a decision that demonstrated the kind of leadership that inspired absolute loyalty. Sarah wasn't asking her soldiers to do anything she wouldn't do herself, and she was ensuring that the burden of saving Chen's life was shared equally among the unit. The final hour of their journey became a testament to military teamwork and determination. Soldiers who had questioned Sarah's qualifications just hours earlier now followed her orders without hesitation, understanding that her decisions were based on sound judgment and genuine concern for their welfare. When the lights of base camp finally appeared through the storm, Sarah was carrying Private Chen on her back, her small frame somehow finding the strength to bear the weight of a soldier nearly twice her size. It was an image that would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it, proof that leadership came in many forms, and that courage was measured not by size or strength, but by the willingness to sacrifice for others. As the exhausted Alpha Company stumbled through the gates of their forward operating base, The contrast between the howling blizzard outside and the warmth of the heated buildings was almost overwhelming. Soldiers who had been fighting hypothermia for hours suddenly found themselves in an environment where survival was no longer in question. The base medical team immediately took charge of the soldiers showing cold-related injuries, with Private Chen being rushed to the aid station for treatment of severe hypothermia. But remarkably, thanks to Sarah's decision-making and the unit's teamwork during the final hours of their ordeal, no one had suffered permanent injury or frostbite. Captain Rodriguez, despite his own exhaustion, immediately began debriefing the mission with his superiors. "Sir," he reported to Colonel Matthews, "the battalion commander, Lieutenant Kim, saved this entire unit. Without her navigation skills and leadership under pressure, we would have lost soldiers tonight." The story of Sarah's navigation spread quickly through the base, transforming her from a relatively unknown intelligence officer into a legend. Soldiers who had never met her knew her name, and those who had served with her spoke of her with a respect typically reserved for combat veterans. Colonel Matthews called Sarah to his office the following morning, where she found herself face to face with not only her battalion commander, but also the brigade commander, Colonel Patricia Hayes, who had flown in specifically to hear about the previous night's events. "Lieutenant Kim," Colonel Hayes began, "what you accomplished last night represents the finest tradition of military leadership. You took responsibility for 46 lives in impossible conditions and brought every single one of them home safely." The formal recognition that followed was unprecedented for a junior officer. Sarah was awarded the Army Commendation Medal for her actions during the blizzard, but more importantly, she was offered immediate assignment as the battalion's operations officer, a position typically reserved for more senior officers with extensive field experience. "Your combination of technical knowledge and practical leadership is exactly what we need in our operations center," Colonel Matthews explained. The most significant change wasn't in Sarah's official recognition, but in how she was perceived by her fellow soldiers. Sergeant Murphy, who had been her harshest critic, became one of her strongest advocates. "I've served with a lot of officers," Murphy told his squad during their next training exercise, "but I've never seen anyone combine book learning with real-world leadership the way Lieutenant Kim did. She didn't just navigate us home, she kept us together as a unit when everything was falling apart." The compass that had been a family heirloom became a symbol of Sarah's leadership philosophy. She often spoke to new officers about the importance of combining traditional skills with modern technology and about the value of staying calm under pressure. "My grandfather's compass didn't just show me direction," she would explain. "It reminded me that sometimes the old ways are the best ways, and that true navigation is about more than just knowing where you're going. It's about bringing everyone with you." Sarah's successful navigation during the Hindu Kush blizzard sparked a fundamental reevaluation of military training programs across all branches of the armed forces. Her demonstration that traditional navigation skills could be more reliable than electronic systems in extreme conditions led to the reintroduction of celestial navigation and terrain association courses that had been largely phased out in favor of GPS-dependent training. The Kim incident, as it became known in military education circles, was incorporated into the curriculum at West Point, the Naval Academy, and the Air Force Academy, as a case study in adaptive leadership and the importance of maintaining traditional skills alongside modern technology. Training programs began emphasizing the kind of holistic environmental awareness that Sarah had demonstrated reading weather patterns, understanding terrain features, and using multiple sources of information to make navigation decisions. Her approach became the gold standard for military navigation training, proving that the most advanced technology was only as reliable as the human intelligence that interpreted it. The military also began recruiting more officers with diverse academic backgrounds, recognizing that Sarah's success had been built on her combination of formal military training with her broader education in geography and environmental science. Sarah's promotion to battalion operations officer marked the beginning of a meteoric rise through the military ranks. Her success in that role led to assignment as a staff officer at division headquarters, where her analytical skills and proven leadership under pressure made her invaluable for planning complex operations. Within 5 years, she had been promoted to major and was commanding her own company, leading soldiers who had heard the legend of the lieutenant who had navigated an entire unit home through a blizzard using only a compass and her knowledge of the stars. Her grandfather's compass remained with her throughout her career, a constant reminder of the values and skills that had made her success possible. She often carried it during important missions, not because she needed it for navigation, but because it represented the connection between past and present, between traditional wisdom and modern leadership. Sarah's story became more than just a military success story. It became a symbol of how knowledge preparation and calm decision-making could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. Her example inspired a generation of military officers to value diverse skills and perspectives and to understand that effective leadership often came from unexpected sources. The compass that had guided her through the storm was eventually donated to the West Point Museum, where it was displayed alongside other artifacts that represented the evolution of military leadership. The inscription read, "Lieutenant Sarah Kim's compass, proof that true navigation requires both ancient wisdom and modern courage." Her story was told in leadership courses, survival training programs, and officer development seminars as an example of how individual competence and character could make the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The young intelligence officer who had been doubted by her peers had become a legend whose influence extended far beyond that single night in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Sarah's successful navigation under extreme conditions became a legend within the battalion and quickly spread throughout the entire military community. Her story was shared in briefings and training sessions as an example of how knowledge, calmness, and determination could overcome even the most daunting challenges. The combination of traditional navigation skills with modern military leadership had created a new paradigm for officer training. Her promotion to operations officer marked a turning point in her career, breaking down biases about her lack of combat experience. The soldiers who once doubted her became her staunchest supporters, understanding that true leadership was measured not by previous combat experience, but by the ability to make sound decisions under extreme pressure. Captain Rodriguez's recommendation was enthusiastic and immediate, recognizing that Sarah had demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical thinking and calm leadership that modern military operations required in an increasingly complex and unpredictable world. The compass, once a simple family heirloom, was enshrined in the battalion's museum as a symbol of perseverance and leadership. Sarah often spoke about the lessons it taught her, not just about navigation, but about honoring promises and trusting one's instincts when technology failed and conventional wisdom proved inadequate. New recruits were encouraged to carry their own symbols of resilience, inspired by Sarah's journey from doubted officer to respected leader. The story of her grandfather's compass became part of military folklore, representing the connection between generations of service members and the importance of maintaining traditional skills alongside modern technology. Military families began sharing their own stories of heirlooms and traditions that connected them to previous generations of service, understanding that the values and skills of the past remained relevant in contemporary military operations. Sarah's story influenced training programs across the military, emphasizing the importance of traditional navigation skills alongside modern technology. Her example underscored the value of diverse backgrounds and perspectives in leadership roles, proving that academic excellence could translate into practical leadership when combined with courage and determination. Her journey reminded the military community that true leadership is not about rank or experience alone, but about courage, knowledge, and the willingness to step forward when it matters most. The young lieutenant, who had been dismissed as inexperienced, had redefined what military leadership looked like in the 21st century.